There were two young boys named Trevor and Will. They spent most of their summer vacation hanging around town, looking for things to do. One hot August night, the boys were sitting on a fence by the main road. And there was a cornfield just across the road. Suddenly, Trevor spotted something in the field. In the darkness, it was difficult to make out, but he thought it looked like some kind of weird animal. He nudged his friend and pointed in the direction of the strange-looking figure. Will said he could see it too. He wasn't sure, but the mysterious thing seemed vaguely human. And the next thing they knew, the thing was gone. The boys craned their necks and scanned the field with their eyes. Out of the blackness came the thing. It slowly walked over the edge of the field before disappearing again. Trevor and Will looked at each other, puzzled. "What was that?" asked Will. I have no idea," replied Trevor. No sooner had he said that than Trevor felt a clammy hand on his shoulder. He turned around and found himself staring directly into the hideous face of the thing. He let out a yell of terror and surprise. The rotting skin on the thing's face was coming off in places, revealing the bone underneath. For a moment, it just stared silently at Trevor with its dark, sunken eyes. And then it suddenly grabbed a hold of his arm, and Trevor felt its fingernails dig into his flesh as he wriggled to get out of its grasp. The boys leaped off the fence and ran down the road, screaming in horror. They didn't stop running until they reached their homes. They tried to tell their parents and friends about the thing they had seen that night, but nobody believed them. When Trevor woke up the next morning, the scratches on his arm were still there. After a few days, they got worse and worse. Trevor got sick. His parents took him to see a doctor. After examining his arm, the doctor told the boy it was infected and gave him some pills to take. Unfortunately, Trevor's condition got worse and worse. The infection spread to his entire arm, and it wasn't long before his flesh was rotting and falling off. He was taken to the hospital, but no matter what the doctors did, no treatment seemed to work. The infection spread throughout his whole body. Trevor was confined to bed, started to waste away. It seemed like he was beyond help as the days went by. He steadily grew worse and worse. His anguished parents could only sit at his bedside and cry as they watched their beloved son slowly rotting away before their eyes. On the day that Trevor finally passed away, Will came to the hospital to visit him. When the boy walked into the hospital room and saw Trevor lying in bed, he was horrified. His friend looked exactly like the thing. There was a young woman who had just started a new job in a large office building. She was walking to work one day when a long black hearse drove up slowly next to her, matching her pace. And this made her nervous. She anxiously watched it out of the corner of her eye. The driver leaned out the window and called to her in a deep, booming voice.
"Do you need a lift?"
She turned to look at him and got a terrible shock. The driver's face was incredibly hideous and deformed. His skin was a deathly pale, and one of his eyes was noticeably higher than the other. And the man pointed to the rear of the vehicle, which contained a coffin.
"Room for one more,"
he said. Frightened by his bizarre appearance and unwelcome suggestion, she refused his offer of a lift. Profoundly disturbed, the woman ran down the street until she came to the office building where she worked. For the rest of the day, she couldn't stop thinking about the strange man in the hearse, and was glad when work was finally over. The woman worked up on the 9th floor, and when the elevator came, it was almost completely full. She hesitated for a moment before stepping in.
"Are you sure you don't want to come in?"
Asked a familiar, booming voice.
There's room for one more.
The woman gasped. It was the hearse driver from this morning, eyeing her with his lopsided, horrible gaze. Now thoroughly spooked, the woman backed away, stuttering, I think I'll take the stairs. And the hearse driver just stared at her as the door slid closed. The woman had only taken a few steps down the stairs when she heard a chorus of screams followed by a deafening crash. She hurried downstairs and discovered the elevator cable had broken, and all the passengers aboard had plunged to a grisly death. A young couple got married, and after the wedding, they held a reception in the bride's grandmother's house. All their family and friends arrived, and they laughed, danced, and sang long into the night. After the reception, the guests decided to play a game of hide-and-seek. The groom covered his eyes and began counting to 100, while his new bride and the other guests ran out of the room, looking for somewhere to hide. Eventually, the groom had found everyone except his beautiful bride. The other guests began calling out her name and searched everywhere for the young woman. They began to grow more and more uneasy when they couldn't find any trace of her. Eventually, they gave up searching, and everybody assumed that the girl had run away and left her husband. As the weeks went by, the husband accepted that his beautiful bride must have had second thoughts about their marriage. He decided to forget about her, go on with his life. However, a few years later, a cleaning lady was dusting in the attic when she came across an old trunk. Out of curiosity, she opened it. Inside the trunk, she found the rotting corpse of a young woman, still dressed in a bridal gown. There was a wedding ring on one bony finger. It was the missing bride. She must have hidden in the trunk and accidentally locked herself inside. It was impossible to tell whether she had suffocated or starved to death. But her face was frozen in a silent scream. Lexi Morgan had a dream. She was walking up a dark staircase, and when she got to the top, she walked into a bedroom. The bedroom carpet was made up of large squares that looked like trapdoors, and each of the windows was fastened shut with big nails that stuck up out of the wood. In her dream, Lexi went to sleep in the bedroom, but during the night, a woman with a pale face, black eyes, and long black hair slipped silently into the room. She leaned over the bed and whispered, "This is an evil place. Run away while you still can." And then the black-haired woman grabbed her arm, and Lexi Morgan woke up with a scream and lay awake the rest of the night, shivering, shaking with fear. In the morning, she told her landlady that she had decided not to go to Kingston after all. "I can't tell you why," she said, "but I just can't bring myself to go there." "Then why don't you go to Dorset?" the landlady asked. "It's a pretty town. It isn't too far." So Lexi Morgan went to Dorset. Someone told her she could find a room in the house at the top of the hill. It was a pleasant-looking house, and the landlady there, a plump, motherly woman, was nice as could be. "Let's look at the room," she said. "I think you will like it." They walked up a dark, carved staircase, like the one in Lexi's dream. In these old houses, the staircases are all the same, Lexi thought. But when the landlady opened the door to the bedroom, it was the room from her dream, with the same carpet that looked like trapdoors, and the same windows fastened with big nails. This is just a coincidence, Lexi told herself. "How do you like it?" the landlady asked. "I'm not sure," Lexi said. Well, take your time, dear, the landlady said. I'll bring up some tea while you think about it. Lexi sat on the bed, staring at the trapdoors, the big nails. Soon there was a knock on the door. It's the landlady with the tea, she thought. But it wasn't the landlady. It was the woman with the pale face and the black eyes and the long black hair. Lexi Morgan grabbed her things and fled.